Hi everyone, my name is Isaiah Noriga. I am a doctoral student, school educator, and counselor. Welcome to the harm reduction section of our psilocybin peer supported education program. In this unit, I will define harm reduction, share core harm reduction principles, its psychosocial effects, archetypes as it relates to being a psilocybin peer supporter, harm reduction strategies and its application, as well as practical advice to reduce the risk of a challenging psychedelic experience. So let us begin. What is harm reduction? According to the National Harm Reduction Coalition, harm reduction, or what I will be referring to as HR, is a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. The philosophical underpinnings of HR come from a few different sources. However, to simplify things, it is important to understand that HR derives from a practical perspective which believes in a spectrum of drug use rather than a binary of addiction or abstinence. HR practices in the U.S. arose from a need for better alternatives than abstinence-only programs to treating addiction. A core tenet of HR is to make an environment as safe as possible for a drug user so that their safety is protected. Although we view psilocybin as medicine and we seek to reduce the stigma attached to drug use, the same principles apply when you are tending to a peer who is having a psychedelic experience. The goal is to provide justice through healing and safety. Also, HR finds ways to respond to unhealthy behaviors by not reinforcing or perpetuating more violence. So now let's quickly glance at the psychosocial effects of these two schools of thought. On the one hand, stigmatization can often elicit feelings of shame, guilt, and isolation due to the fact that if you do not remain abstinent, you are in the wrong. Or rather, by not taking a deep introspective look at the reasons why people use, it can also perpetuate more feelings of not being understood. Additionally, criminalizing psychedelic use for wellness or mental health can also elicit feelings of shame by making people feel less than, unimportant, or even siphoned away from their family, friends, and community. On the other hand, HR seeks to create a sense of belonging by not ostracizing your peers, but by bringing them in, so that they can find community, they can feel important, and that they are not alone in their potential experience. So to tie this in specifically to psilocybin use, it is important to understand harm reduction as an archetype. Archetypes, as defined by Carl Jung, are universal, primal symbols, images, or stories that are derived from culture, literature, religion, history, and art. Why archetypes are also important is that these symbols and stories are often connection points towards our shared human experience. We can note that there is typically an arc to that experience, and in that arc there is often a peak to this experience with a gradual or sudden come down, which is referenced by Amy in a previous section that we call the arc of the psilocybin experience. Similarly, it is believed that life takes on a similar trajectory that often ebbs and flows with many mountains and valleys. Therefore, by using archetypes to understand our role as peer supporters, it can help us empathize, relate to, and understand our peers without doing more harm, minimizing risk, and maximizing the potential benefits. For example, there are 4 archetypes, one being the voyage and return, where a person after their journey comes back home with some newfound wisdom. The second archetype, as an example, is the rags to riches, where someone who comes from unfortunate circumstances is able to make their situation better. The third is a quest archetype, where someone has a proud sense that they need to accomplish something or arrive at something that is beneficial to them or the world. And the last archetype that we have as an example is the rebirth archetype, where a part of someone dies so that they can be reborn again and live out their full human potential. In all 4 of these archetypes, the common thread that connects them all is that we are all living out our particular archetype. We are all on a journey towards something. While we may be at different stages of our journey, it is important that we stray away from the judgment on the specificities on how one's journey is playing out. Therefore, HR is about our shared responsibility, the responsibility to nurture, inspire, and lead each other to fulfill our purpose by doing as little harm as possible. As a psilocybin peer supporter, your role is to assist your peer on whatever journey life leads them to. As peer supporters, we must be resolute. We must understand that while this is not an easy task, it is a necessary one, because our humanity is inextricably linked and our journey is ever bound to us all. Alright, so now let's dive into a more practical HR application. I have identified what I call the 5 anchors of being an HR peer supporter. These 5 anchors are scan, assess, return, hold space, and transition. Before I explain what these 5 anchors entail, I want to say that I will be oscillating between 2 different scenarios. The first scenario is an unplanned environment, which is something like being at a festival, a concert, or just on the street. And the second scenario is a planned environment, where you are asked or working with a peer to sit in and witness their experience. So the first anchor is scan. This is where you scan the environment and ask yourself questions like who is involved, what is happening, where is this person on the psilocybin arc? And also keeping in the forefront of your mind safety first. The safety of yourself, the person or persons journeying, and others that may be around. Scanning in the context of a planned environment would involve deciding on the setting that you and your peers believe to be the safest and most comfortable place for them to have an experience. Another thing to scan during a planned environment is having initial talks with a peer to ensure your peer is in a good mental state to have a psychedelic experience. Violent tendencies or suicidal ideation, severe depression and anxiety, delusions, are all warning signs that someone may require a different level of support and that they may have a tremendously difficult experience if they take a psychedelic. In these cases, sometimes the best harm reduction is letting your peer know that you are not able to support them for their own safety and refer them to a trained therapist or counselor. The second anchor is to identify and assess. In an unplanned scenario, identify the person and identify who you are by gathering consent if possible. Identify any injuries or any possible harmful objects in the near vicinity. In a planned setting, you want to identify additional contact people that could help you de-escalate or could provide an extra measure of safety. This can include family members or the journeyer's therapist if they have knowledge of your peer choosing to do this experience. You would also want to identify what tools or mediums the peer would want around their space when having the experience, i.e. headphones, a bed, blanket, water, comforting objects, etc. Also assess for medical attention. Assess for the needs such as hydration, overheating, overstimulation, and assess vital signs. What is extremely important to note is that you may not be a medical professional and this is not a CPR or first aid training. Therefore, it is important to try to assess these things. However, if you're unsure at any moment, please call 911. The quicker you call 911, the quicker the person can receive the medical attention they need. Consider using Fireside Project as a tool to support your approach and peer support. 2. Fireside Project is a psychedelic crisis hotline who provides free, confidential peer support via phone and text message. Fireside is staffed by compassionate and diverse team members who are rigorously trained in active listening and providing support during psychedelic experiences. Additionally, these first two anchors should be completed rather quickly in a couple of minutes or less. After going through these first 3 steps, there are no indications of psychological or physiological distress. You may continue to focus on your role as a peer supporter. In a planned setting, it is important to assess these things in a very similar way and also call any personal contacts you have. The Fireside Project, or in severe threatening situations, 911, if there is anything outside of the scope of your understanding. Arrowhead provides a useful psychedelic crisis resource. They explain that if you feel that lives are in danger or that the situation is out of control and nobody else is willing to support your peer, then professional help is required. In critical or life-threatening situations, there are a few things to keep in mind. 1. Who is available to help you? Find someone with a medical emergency experience. The more the better, but someone with Red Cross training is much better than someone who knows no basic first aid. 2. If the person is seizing, loosen clothing, cushion and position the person's body on their side to prevent injury and choking. Seizures can be very, very serious and are riskier the longer they last and the more frequently they occur, and can cause permanent brain damage in the worst case scenarios. 3. If the person is conscious, look for telltale signs of what they took. Severe jaw tension is usually associated with MDMA or other stimulants. Watch for eye wiggles are also a sign of stimulant use. Look for sweating. Sweating is also a good sign at this point. Watch for chills and cover them with a blanket if they appear to be shivering and you have access to that. 4. If the person is unconscious, gently try to wake them. Shake them gently and speak to them in a firm voice. Are you okay? Should I get a doctor? If they are vomiting, turn them on their side so the vomit can flow out of their mouth to prevent choking. Try to determine if the person is in a coma or a dissociated state. 5. If a person is not breathing, attempt to get their breathing going again. Loosen clothing. Shake gently. Clear airways, especially if they have vomited. Rescue breathing can be performed by someone certified to do so. 6. If the person's heart is not beating, CPR can be performed by someone certified to do so. 7. Call 911. Remember that it will take time for assistance to respond, and be prepared for the arrival of emergency vehicles and possibly police officers. Clear a way for emergency personnel to get to that person. If you are at a party, get the music turned off and get an announcement made to local friends if any are available. This can be a difficult decision in many situations, but at this point we're talking about a life-threatening event. The consequences of calling in outside help will be far less severe than the consequences of losing a life. So the third anchor is to return. Return to the first 2 anchors at any moment that feels necessary. The 4th anchor is to hold space. Hold space involves using the de-escalation and attending skills that you learn in other sections of this program. Some reminders applicable to any setting when holding space is to actively listen without trying to interpret, being fully present to your peers, and be as calm as possible using we language and having a calm tone of voice. If a peer is agitated and potential for violent escalation, there are a few things to keep in mind as well. Safety first, protect yourself. Keeping your peer in a relaxed position. Remind your peer that there is a reason they chose to have an experience. The experience is temporary and these feelings will subside. Lean in and breathe into their experience. 4. What emotions or thoughts are challenging their experience? And then try to guide them back to a place of inquiry and internal dialogue. Some additional examples of holding space really come from establishing some groundwork with your peers prior to their experience. This is really important because a lot of things that may come up, such as a peer locking themselves in their room, running out of the safe space, etc., can be mitigated by establishing a strong rapport with your peer, gathering a sense of what their triggers are, and coming up with safety plans in case some of these issues arise. Lastly, just building a safe and comforting relationship with the peer prior to the peer's experience is the key here. The fifth anchor is to transition. In an unplanned setting, the transition can look like bringing your peer back to their friends and family if they are moved to a safer area, a shaded place, etc. It can also look like transitioning your peer back into a normal state of consciousness by letting them process their experience, giving them time to reflect, or providing them with easily digestible food and water. Additionally, this could also look like providing their friends and family with some tips of further processing and integration so that their peer can gather some insights into their experience. In a planned environment, hopefully you have already had an integration plan in place that involves some kind of verbal processing and or artistic expression while also guiding them to use their insights into actionable items so that they can implement this into their daily lives. This integration process may span over days, weeks, months. However, it is important to remember that you are not their therapist, so feel free to recommend that they see a psychedelic-friendly therapist or attend a free Silo Health integration workshop for group processing. Overall, in this process, it is important to remind ourselves and our peers of a quote that my dad used to tell me all the time, which is, "Too much of one thing is not good for nothing." This essentially means that even though research has shown and continues to show the safety and benefits of psilocybin, it is best to use psilocybin with discretion and in moderation. Thank you all for sharing this time with me. I hope you're able to get some value added out of our harm reduction section and that you feel more prepared than before to be a great peer supporter out in your community. We need you. You are important, and enjoy the rest of this program. Thank you.